Right, Ian Sollom, you are the parliamentary candidate for South Cambridgeshire in this election. Tell me a bit about yourself. What's your connection to the area?
So I first moved to Cambridgeshire just over 14 years ago with my wife. Actually, we both came to do postgraduate study at the university. So I did a master's in mathematics and then a PhD in astrophysics. At the end of that, in 2010, decided I'd had enough of academia, so I went off into the world of work and worked with a business consultancy helping businesses make better, more evidence-based decisions. Moved into South Cambridgeshire in Grantchester in 2012 with my then baby son, and we've been here ever since. So he's now at school in Coton, and we really love it here. So last year I was elected as a district councillor and really keen to represent the local area.
And I should say, actually, we're in Grantchester. We were going to do this interview in your home, but we're in your local pub just because you've got building works next door. So I'll just say that so that the background makes sense. We'll jump into key issues straight away. Before I get round to what are your key issues for the area, I think we should do Brexit first.
Yes. Yeah.
Briefly, if you would, what is your position on Brexit?
So my position is, I actually joined the Liberal Democrats before the referendum in 2016 and really wanted to join the Liberal Democrats as partly to campaign for Remain. And I've continued to campaign for Remain ever since. I think leaving the EU is a really bad idea and really want to see that stop. Now, we had the referendum in 2016. It was right that the government went away and interpreted what that result meant, but it always needed to be subject to some kind of democratic scrutiny. The Liberal Democrats had always advocated for another referendum. That would be the appropriate form of democratic scrutiny.
Why is that the appropriate form?
Because it started with a referendum. We felt that was the right way that it should be put back to the people for them to decide, was this what you voted for? Parliament has been there scrutinising it. They haven't. Their scrutiny has led to the conclusion that this isn't a deal that the country wants, and that's why we're here.
Is that the case that Parliament has said that? I mean, there was a vote of approval on the sort of Boris Johnson's deal right at the last, wasn't there? It was more the timetable that derailed that.
Well, I think that it was the case that it was just creeping over the line. I think everyone could see that was very much focused on the terms of the withdrawal, but the future relationship was going to cause more problems. That's why we're in the situation of having an election now. So that's going to give a mandate one way or the other for the people that are elected to represent the views of their constituents.
So the idea of the second referendum, or I should say there isn't one set idea, is there? It can be done a number of ways. Before we speak about that, I should say I understand it's the Liberal Democrat policy is to revoke if you win an outright majority. Is that right? If
we were to win an outright majority, I think it's just the credibly consistent position at this election. If you go back to 2017, there wasn't actually a deal negotiated at that point. So we were just saying, look, this should be put, whatever deal is negotiated, we should put that back to the people. We do have a deal on the table now. We don't think it's a very good deal. We're very clear that remaining is the best option. So with clear conscience, we stand up and we say we believe Remain is the best option. Therefore, if we were to win an outright majority, we would revoke. Now, in reality, I can certainly accept that's not where we're headed at the moment, although we're very competitive in South Cambridgeshire. That's not the way the picture's looking nationally. So we'd be looking to it's probably another referendum.
Working with another party that also wants
working with other parties, other independents.
Can I pin you down on specifics of what kinds of second referendum you want? Because even there's a sort of selection of choice, isn't there?
So at this point, and it's a personal view rather than a party view, I think that we've tested the patience of the EU to the limit. We've now had 3 different variations of the deal. There is a clear deal on the table at the moment. It's not a very good one in my opinion, but I think we should stop messing around and actually just put that in a referendum up against the Remain option, and certainly I'd be campaigning hard for Remain.
Boris Johnson versus Remain, effective Boris Johnson's deal versus.
Yes, yeah. I think this idea that we would spend more time negotiating yet another deal is not a good use of time. The more time we wait around, the more uncertainty there is. I think it's time to get on and get some clarity on what the public wants on this.
So can I pose a hypothetical then? Suppose you get your referendum that you want, and Remain versus Boris Johnson's deal, and your side, the Remain side, loses that referendum. Where would you stand then?
I would be very disappointed. I think at that point, clearly the public has spoken at that point, and with a very clear deal. Exactly what happens beyond that, I think we will be looking to push for as close an alignment as possible within the framework of the deal
so
as it's laid out.
To use the sort of vernacular, you'd accept the result at that point. You'd be for Remain, or not you would be for Leave, but you wouldn't be pushing for another referendum after that.
There would be a lot of detail to be negotiated in the future relationship, and I think we'd always be pushing for more. A more close alignment with the EU, so that we could continue trading with these partners on very good terms. Now, if the opportunity arose and there was a shift in the public mood, then yes, maybe we would push for a re-entry into the EU as a full member. But that's so far down the line at the moment that we're getting into so many hypotheticals. You can say it's a possibility, but it's not something that I can say definitively right now is something that I would definitely advocate.
Put this to you then, because I think you've said before, certainly your party leader has said this, that Boris Johnson's deal is not, as he would advertise it, getting Brexit done. It actually leads to a further period of time. Everybody sort of probably has their own idea of how long that might be, but whether it's a year or several years or whatever it is of further negotiations to finalise this deal. So if I understand your point on the second referendum, what you're essentially saying is, were we to have a second referendum, we at this point have concrete proposals, and that's why you would accept that were that to be the choice of the electorate, you would accept that because they'd have seen the concrete proposal and gone with it. But is there not just going to be a further argument for that later down the line? I mean, presumably hold on a second. Presumably you either think Boris Johnson's deal is, here we are, these are the terms, and we can now have a second referendum, or you think it's not, we don't quite have that detail yet. So I suppose I'm wondering, are you jumping the gun several years, Brian?
Well, I think so. There's 2 aspects, of course. There's the withdrawal agreement, which is actually agreeing us stepping out of the EU as a full member, and then there's the negotiation on the future relationship, which at the moment is only in very outlined terms. So there's a lot of detail to pin down there. Now, once the withdrawal agreement is passed, and if that's via a confirmatory referendum, then we are out of the European Union, and I have to accept that. But there's still a long process to go through of democratic scrutiny of the democratic process, democratic scrutiny of what the government proposes.
So you don't see yourself standing here in 5 years as the Remain candidates, as it were?
It's a hypothetical that's difficult to envisage how those negotiations go. I can certainly see in 5 years' time that we are still talking about our relationship with the EU if we don't succeed in actually halting this process, because I do think those negotiations will go on for some considerable time. Every trade expert that is talked to about this can't envisage that it will be over at the end of next year.
I take your point. So on the question of, because there's an argument that it's not democratic. The government said at the time, and the parties all campaigned along the premise of this was the result will be implemented. I take your point that I've heard you said a number of hustings. Well, look, we're standing in a democratic process, and the point of democratic scrutiny is that you can change course, especially following scrutiny. But do you see the other side of it, that people might feel very disappointed? Not even disappointed, but in some way like they've been sort of tricked, as it were, with the promise of that first referendum. I mean, how would you look a fervent Leave voter in the eye and say, sorry, actually that was all for nothing?
Well, it's not been all for nothing, because we've learnt an awful lot through the attempt.
Not all for nothing.
I absolutely, I think the divisions that Brexit has created are going to be very difficult to heal, and I don't take that lightly at all. And I've talked to many Leave voters on the campaign trail, actually over the last three years, and always try to engage with them positively. And generally, we can agree to disagree on a rational basis. But what we often do agree on is that there are a lot more important issues that we should be talking about.
Sure, but it would not take away from the fact that you'd be having said to a majority of the electorate, at least in 2016, sorry, actually we have overturned that
through a democratic process, and I think that's where it's beholden on people on my side of the argument, and actually on the other side, leading the other side of the argument of what democracy really means, and that it is okay to re-examine decisions.
Do you think the 2016 vote was undemocratic based on the premise that it would be,
I think some of those promises were misleading. I wouldn't say that it was undemocratic. It's just that was part of what was misleading. That actually, that referendum shouldn't trump all democracy forever, and we need to keep having elections until we match that particular result.
So you've already said that you think it's sort of reasonable to assume that the Liberal Democrats will not win a majority.
Yes. Yeah.
Which puts you, if you're after a second referendum, very much in the camp of negotiating with Labour. You have also said, though, that Jeremy Corbyn you don't believe is fit to be Prime Minister. You're going to be in an awkward situation even if you win.
I think we are going to be in a very awkward situation if a hung Parliament is the way that the result comes out, or sort of a balanced Parliament, I prefer to call it. Then it is going to be quite a complex negotiation, and I personally wouldn't rule out the possibility of any party looking at a referendum.
You'd have to not only vote with them on a policy of the referendum, you would have to prop them up in government. And you have said that you do not believe he is fit to govern. I mean, it's one or the other, isn't it? I don't think that Jeremy Corbyn is fit to be Prime Minister. I don't think that Boris Johnson is fit to be Prime Minister. I think that it will be about working, and I think there are many people in Parliament, even within their own respective parties, that would agree with that. It certainly seems to be the case. But we're talking about you, and you would be potentially have to vote to prop up one, as it were, in government.
We have to see what happens after the election.
Is that a situation you can see yourself?
I will make that judgment at the time.
I think what voters probably want, because it's not an unreasonable hypothetical, is it? I mean, that is well within. In fact, your whole candidacy is arguably, as you've already said, it's not unreasonable to assume that you won't win a majority. Your whole candidacy presumably is predicated on forming some kind of alliance with other parties, and we don't know exactly where the votes will fall, but
therefore we don't.
It's unreasonable to assume that wouldn't include Labour
But it could equally include the Conservative. You're looking for what. But you
have also said you don't believe it'd be fit for Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister. So you're in quite the awkward situation where you don't see either of the two leaders.
Absolutely.
But you wouldn't. Hold on a second. You would not support either of those to be Prime Minister. If they required your votes and the votes of your party members to be a Prime Minister, in other words, to have a parliamentary majority, are you saying me you cannot guarantee that you would withhold that, even though you believe them to be unfit?
So there is such a thing as a minority government, and we can choose to support on specific issues.
Do you think you could form a minority government without
Jeremy
Corbyn or Boris Johnson?
I don't think we could form a minority government necessarily. I think it's likely that one of the Labour or the Conservatives would aim for. I think the clear way to ask
this question is: Are you able to rule out propping up any kind of parliamentary group that would see either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn leading the country from the office of Prime Minister?
What do you mean by propping up, though? Is the question.
Lending them your votes to sort of keep them in power, as it were, to allow them to pass their legislation, which is not just Brexit legislation.
I think if beyond the resolution of Brexit legislation and trying to stop Brexit, I think we would have to be looking. We couldn't guarantee any support. We would be looking at an issue by issue.
I'm not about whether you'd guarantee support, but can you rule this out? I mean, considering if you think they're unfit.
Well, it is if that's an issue of national importance, national security, then you know those kinds of issues. Then you have to take your role very seriously.
Let me rephrase the question then. Would you feel like, having said what you've said about them and the way you've campaigned, that you would be letting down those who voted for you if you were to then support either of those two candidates in such a way?
I would personally be very disappointed if I was put in a position where I had to support.
Would you feel like you'd let down?
But we have to look at the hypotheticals. Yeah. If neither Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn win a majority, is their position as leader of their respective parties still tenable? And so there's a lot that could happen in that hypothetical.
There's more than one hypothetical, but just very clearly, would you feel like you'd sort of in some way misled or I suppose gone against what it was perhaps people thought they were signing up for when they voted for you? If you were to, in a sort of say a coalition type arrangement, were you to lend your votes to one of those two leaders?
So I think we've been clear that we're not looking to agree a coalition with coalition.
Would you agree that would be a fair statement? Were you to then find yourself, if you're not planning to be in that situation, presumably it's an easy one to answer. You can just say no.
I'm saying that's what I'm saying. I'm saying no. We're not.
You wouldn't feel like you. Okay,
we're not going into coalition with a Boris Johnson-led Conservatives or a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party.
Okay, understood. Let's move on to local issues then.
Sure.
I'll let you go first, as it were. What is it? What do you think are the local issues? What are the issues? Why should someone vote for you in this election, not your two rivals for South Cambridgeshire?
So I'm already a district councillor in the area, and I've got a good handle on what's happening locally. We've had a lot of growth in South Cambridgeshire, and it's a wonderful success story of Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. But that's brought its own challenges, and I think particularly we've had the infrastructure challenge, and that goes beyond just public transport and roads. It's about doctors' surgeries. It's about schools.
So sorry, your key local issues that you're sort of pitching your candidacy on, besides the sort of national, the Brexit, the key local ones are sort of infrastructure. Am I right? So
infrastructure is part of it, particularly transport infrastructure. So
let's talk about transport infrastructure.
Sure.
Then. What have you done sort of to relieve the issues that you've raised in your role as a district councillor?
So as a district councillor, I've been part of the Greater Cambridge Partnership. I've sat on the joint assembly of the Greater Cambridge Partnership, providing some level of scrutiny to the proposals that the Greater Cambridge Partnership has put forward. So some of those have been good ideas.
But you can't sort of point to a particular... I appreciate that's not necessarily how being a district councillor works, but there's not sort of one big sort of policy idea you can point to as... So
the big thing that I've been trying to champion is around the Girton interchange as part of my role as a district councillor. At the moment, the Girton interchange is actually being upgraded as part of the A14 works, but sadly highways in England, without a great deal of foresight in my opinion, have not made that an all-ways interchange. So people coming along the A428, say from Cambourne, can't easily get onto the M11 at Girton. So that is something that that's an example of something that I've been campaigning for.
So just beyond infrastructure, were you to be the MP, what are some other big issues you'd be
I think, so particularly education, Cambridgeshire schools have historically been underfunded, and we've seen the cuts since 2015 really impact hard.
But what would you be doing as an MP in that case?
So as an MP, you're really championing and taking a lead in lobbying government for a fairer deal for South Cambridgeshire.
Am I right in thinking that a lot of the issues you'd be going, as a Liberal Democrat, you'd be in a situation where you would be sort of lobbying for more funding for this, lobbying for more funding for that, which is not abnormal for an MP. In fact, that is the role of an MP in many senses. Yeah. But I know, for example, suppose the polls would suggest the Conservatives are the most likely to win a majority. That's what they're currently saying at the time of this interview. Do you think there's a case to be said that your Conservative colleague, just for representing South Cambridgeshire for the lobbying aspect, is a better choice, both in his access to sort of senior government officials in the Conservative Party at least, and sort of his experience, because you're quite new to politics, aren't you?
He certainly makes that case, but if you look at, so there's two aspects to that. I would say, one, look at what the Conservative Party has done to local government, to local funding over the last.
Can you be as lobbying if your party's not in power?
So I would invite you to go and look at Liberal Democrat MPs across the country. Where Liberal Democrat MPs have been elected, they've been very effective at getting a good deal for their local area. You can point to people like Tim Farron, who have successfly lobbied for...
I'll take your points and move you on before we run through a list.
Yeah,
yes, okay. I'll take your points. So I'll move on to one of my own, which is development. You've already said there's been a lot of development in South Cambridgeshire, and you sort of said actually in many ways it's a success story, and certainly economically the area is doing very well compared to other parts of the country. You've already said that comes with challenges. From the sort of from development, do you think there's too much, I suppose, in South Cambridgeshire, or too much, the pace of it perhaps?
So I think it's about having the right sort of development. It's about we had a.
So does that mean you don't think we currently have too much development in South Cambridgeshire?
What we've had is too much unplanned development, and that's what's really caused the problem. So we had a period of time where we didn't have a local plan at the district council level.
So
under the Conservatives.
Type of development that we're seeing now, I appreciate the Lib Dems have only been in control of the district council a year and a half, but you're happy with the scale of development currently? Let me hit you with the statistics very quickly. So last 5 years. Homes completed in South Cambridgeshire, 3,987. The next 5 years, 7,376. It's like an 85% increase, I believe that is. Peak year in that time, 2022, 2023, 1,934 new homes. I know again, to mention your rival, Anthony Brown, a Conservative candidate's been taking this up as an election issue of his, says there's more faster rate building here than many cities. Those statistics, you comfortable with that?
Well, I mean, the numbers of house built that we've got to build, that's set by central government. The government tells us how much as a local authority
it says
that we
in the
need
local
to
those statistics
to build,
form part of the local plan, which is that legislation, that sort of statutory obligation you refer to. Now, under the local plan by 2031, South Cambridgeshire would have to build 19,500 homes. I think I'm right in saying.
Yeah.
On the current trajectory, which is from council documents, council forecasts, it's going to be 23,709. So you're over by about 20%. So you're actually going over. That's not a sort of defence, as it were, if defence is the right word. You look at the council that you're a part of in your own party, presumably is.
So I think it's about, as I say, it's about getting the right sort of development. We've got a real problem with the affordability of living in South Cambridgeshire, and there's a real crisis in affordable homes. And actually, affordable homes is not just about the affordability of the house itself.
I take your point on it's the type of development. So, but I mean, apologies if this is then an oversimplification, but just on the scale of development, in principle, factoring in that it could be the best kind of development as you see fit, perhaps, you're not in the camp of saying we have too much development, or you'd like to see the pace of development slowed.
I'd like to see development treated sensitively, but I'd certainly like to see development whereby people on low income. We have a housing crisis in the country.
But just so from that logic, would it be correct to sort of assume then that you're comfortable with the pace of development?
The right sort of development, I think that we have a housing crisis that we need to address. So the pace of development, it needs to be in keeping and working with local communities.
Let's assume that is a given though, but you are happy with the pace. Yeah.
Under those conditions, yes.
Okay. Do you think there's a sort of threat to the rural character? Because that argument does get made.
I think that argument comes from there's been a lot of speculative development on the edges of villages, and that hasn't been planned, and that shouldn't have gone. And I am against
building on the green belt.
I think there are places where it can be done sensitively, where the local community is open-minded about it. I can point to people in Harston that are interested in actually revitalising Harston to some extent, but it has to be where there is support from the local community, and it has to be very sensitive to the environmental concerns. So I think the principle is, look, the green belt is there for a reason. So we don't do it lightly, but we don't rule it out altogether. We take a look at each thing on a case by case basis. There's a principle that there's an assumption of this isn't a good idea, and that's certainly an assumption that I make generally.
On the sort of development and tying in with the green theme, can I ask what's your view on wind turbines for South Cambridgeshire?
I'm a supporter of wind power. I'm a supporter of onshore wind power, but they have to be located in the best place to capture the wind. I mean, there's a great community wind turbine in Gamlingay, has community support. You know, I'm not aware of where the best places are to site wind turbines, but we do need to make a switch to more renewable sources. Is that the best use of land? Is it the best use? There's lots of trade-offs.
You voted with the climate emergency that was passed by your council.
Yes.
I believe it. I'm right in saying you did also vote for a motion at the full council in September to support a campaign to allow for local authorities such as South Cambridgeshire District Council to have the power to give approval for wind turbines.
Yes.
And it can be an issue that upsets people. It tends to invite the sort of you don't want it in your, the not in my backyard type argument. Yeah. But you're happy with it in principle. Well, your voting record suggests you are.
Yeah. I'm happy with it in principle. All that does is give the power to the. It would still need to go through the planning process to determine whether it was appropriate for being sited in a particular location, and I would suggest that putting it next to somebody's house isn't an appropriate place for it, so in someone's backyard.
There's always going to be someone who opposes. When you said with the green belts, well, as long as the community's on board, it's the challenge is these things are hard to measure, aren't they? In a way,
yes,
they
are.
Always be voices for and against.
Look, politics isn't simple, and people are voting for their representatives at any level.
You would be happy to sort of upset a few people, as it were, if
you can please some of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time.
So similarly, on green belts, on wind turbines, you're happy to take a firm line if you believe you've got the support, even if there is some pushback.
Yeah. There's.
So I'll bring this to a close by asking you: is there what other key issues? What haven't I asked you that you want to get across to voters that?
So I mean, the key thing for me, to take it back to this is a Brexit election, but it's a Brexit election because it's taken up so much space already, and I think that we have this proposal from the Johnson Conservatives that we just need to get Brexit done at this point. The fact is that passing the withdrawal agreement really doesn't get Brexit done, and there are issues like we've talked about schools and the housing crisis. I think there's also the crisis in the NHS of funding that
your main pitch is the Brexit.
The main pitch is because that affects every other issue. The climate and environment emergency. We don't get to talk about these things as much because, as we've found, we've spent most of the time talking about Brexit. So
absolutely, and I'm sure you'll continue to do so. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thanks very much, Ben.